Hi everyone, you're very welcome to the very last in the iAtelier Expert Series talk. We're just going to give it a second or so and let everyone come in, and then we'll begin shortly. Thanks again for joining us.
Okay, good afternoon, folks, again. Welcome to all of our iAtelier partners and participants again this evening. My name is Michael McLaughlin. I'm a lecturer in digital design, digital fabrication at Limerick School of Art and Design. Unfortunately, this is our last iAtelier expert talk. I hope that you have enjoyed the entire series. I hope you've gotten some inspiration from it. The good thing is we have Gareth Neal this evening. I'm extremely excited to say that. In some ways, he might conclude or summarize the thoughts on digital technologies that we've been having along the entire series. Gareth Neal established his practice in 2006 and has since become internationally recognized at the forefront of British furniture design. He is known as a progressive thinker, combining the latest high-end digital fabrication processes with traditional craft techniques. His conceptually rigorous, environmentally conscious, and beautifully crafted work has fostered collaborations with the likes of Zaha Hadid Architects, and Gareth's work is housed in the world's leading museum of art and design, the V&A Museum. I heard Gareth speak a number of years back at the Making In conference at Joseph Walsh Studio in Cork here in Ireland. His work really resonated with me straight away because it produced a lot of answers for questions that I was sort of struggling to articulate answers to when talking about digital processes, digital fabrication processes within the craft environment and industry. Through his work, Gareth investigates the extremes of the craft debate. He is a hands-on designer who is fascinated by process, whether that be traditional tools or the latest computer-controlled router, etc. He aims to uncover the best of the past and bring that into contemporary culture, while simultaneously investigating and pioneering new processes and new technologies. Gareth, I'm delighted to have you present to us this afternoon. You can share your screen there whenever you're ready to do so, and start whenever you want. And just a reminder to everybody listening that we have the Q&A tab at the bottom for your questions, and myself and my colleague Eleanor will go through the questions with Gareth at the end. Thank you, Gareth.
Well, thank you for such a fantastic introduction, Michael. That was just great. I mean, I don't need to say anything more really now. I just need to show some images, and hopefully what you said, it will make sense. I gave this presentation quite a lot of thought for everyone, well, as you'd kind of expect someone to who was getting paid to do a talk, but I just wanted to make sure it resonated with you all, and I got my messages across, and I've done that in two different ways. So I'm going to do a bit of a presentation like I would normally. So it's a classic kind of slideshow presentation talking through some work. And then a little while back, about a sort of 9 months ago, I made a very short film which kind of amalgamated lots of films of mine and kind of tried to tell a story about what I do and why I do it. So we're going to show that after I've done this presentation, and Michael will play that, and hopefully it's a bit of fun, but also it's a little bit provocative, and hopefully it might stimulate some debate so we can have some questions and discussion at the end. So I thought the best place to start was with Mr. Babbage. Now, I just thought, I don't normally show these slides, but I just thought it's always good to get the context of the people that we have to thank for digital technologies. And And Babbage, being the polymath that he was, an engineer, a philosopher, a mathematician, he in fact invented the first mechanical computer. So the reason we're talking on Zoom is thanks to this particular chap here. And even though he never made his machine and it was made later, it did actually work. So a mechanical working computer, which is kind of interesting to reflect upon as we go through this presentation. So there's a few things here that we, like milestones, and I sort of tried to do it via decades. There's not loads of this, so I'm not going to bore the hell out of you with different things. And I'm certainly not going on to all these links. So we could go and see Eric the robot, and he was a mechanical robot that sort of stood up and would lift his arm and open his mouth and sort of wink his eyes. And obviously, again, not a robot as we know it, but he was a milestone in the introduction of something doing something by itself, but through mechanics, in the guise of a human, or in the guise of a man, in fact, as the lady makes out when she introduces him. So, and then we move on to the kind of electronic computing, the step forward that took us away from mechanical engineering to electronics. And of course, electronic computing, well, not of course, but for those of you who do or don't know, electronic computing was really developed for the purposes of decoding encrypted messaging. And this particular computer was developed by the American military. So you can see the sheer size and volume of these things. And I think probably the desktop that you're sitting on is probably far more powerful than that ginormous room-sized computer. Now, 1950s come along. I'm still not born. Richard Clegg, he invented the CNC mill. So like what I like about why this is in here is because it's getting closer to kind of some of the tooling that I use and perhaps some of you guys use. But of course, this is what would have been done mechanically is now being done, fed and organized electronically. So our mechanical machine is milling away our metal or wood, but it's being controlled digitally. So it's kind of like a combination of the previous computer and our mechanical robot or our Babbage machine. So yeah, and then it starts getting a little bit more exciting, like digital starts affecting the world we live in. The sort of 60s arrive and we have the first ever digital computer game was invented by Steve Russell. It was called Space Wars. I mean, I don't think it's going to keep you occupied for that long in terms of its gameplay, and the graphics aren't that much cop, but it's a breakthrough from digital being used in terms of something that is in industry into the mainstream, something that we potentially might start to access ourselves at home. And some of you may or may not have heard of Doctor Who, but the Doctor Who theme tune was the first ever theme tune to use an electronic soundtrack, so fully composed by the BBC on electronic instruments. And there on the right we have Peter, Holdcroft, I think that's how you say it, who invented the laser cutter. So the laser cutter, well, we probably all know what one of those is, and a lot of us have got access to the laser cutters now. That was invented in 1967, so a long time ago. So like the laser cutter being perhaps the most readily available digital technology that some of us have got access to. Anyway, it's sort of gets more exciting as we hit the 70s with these haircuts, and these nerds start working out how to really pull together home computing, and the idea of kind of live feed through the internet is with us. But kind of what excites me, I suppose, is I was born in the 70s, so I'm starting to get influenced by this now. We, as a young boy in 1970, maybe late 70s, we had a computer at home. We had a BBC B or something of that nature. In fact, it might have been in the 80s. But, you know, at the same time, craft work, for those of us who know who craft work is, the kind of digital music pioneers, start on their journey of really turning the digital sounds into pop music. And then by 1980, Kraftwerk have got a #1 with the model and computer love. So it's infected society. Digital music is, and digital, the world of digital is all around us. And at that point, AutoCAD is invented. So we now have access to designing digitally on computers. And Fred Bear, whose Prism chair is just there to the right, designed that on AutoCAD, and it's a craft object. It's a handmade object to look digital. So he designed it on the computer, but in fact it was made by hand. So it's got to that point where, you know, it's in the craft arena as well, or the design arena. Obviously it's being used in industry, but in terms of hand making, smaller makers, smaller businesses, it's not so accessible. And then just so happens also in 1983, Chuck Hall invents the 3D printer. So like, all right, it's a long time until perhaps, you know, the average person gets access to this stuff. Me being the average person, this is 1996. I am in my second year at university, and I've sort of kind of half stumbled out of a rave, I suppose, or kind of a hippie shop in the back streets of Glastonbury. I don't know, one or the other, but that is who I am. And I was brought up, my father was an archaeologist, so I was really sort of brought up in a field looking back in time, but I was much more, I suppose at that age, really, really interested in the future. You know, 1999 was on its way, 2000 was on its way. The idea of the new millennium was upon us. So quite an exciting, for me, quite an exciting time to be, I guess I'm probably about 18 now, 19 maybe. And then I don't normally show this work, but it's good to reflect back before we move on to the kind of things. This is the first thing I ever made on a CNC machine. It's called thoracic. It was just cut pieces of plywood, so flat pieces of plywood cut on a very old CNC machine that had actually come out of industry, not so dissimilar to that machine there on the right. And they were the machines I wanted to play with. Even though I was learning cabinet making, I was fascinated by that machine and I wanted to use it. It was never used. No one ever dared use it. And I managed to draw this line file, managed to persuade the technician to fire the thing up and give it a crack. And sure enough, he did for me. And that was the resulting object in it. And even now you can see some similarities in that work as we move on to what sort of later perhaps I've made more of a reputation for myself. And I'll stuck these two images in to kind of talk about, we've talked about the evolution of digital, but like, and really the same thing applies to tools. So tools have evolved too. So this wooden thing here on the left is called an old woman's tooth, which I think is a great name. You can imagine her, you know, she just, you know, she's had a long life. She hasn't had any dentistry her whole life, and that's her one tooth for eating wood. But that then evolved into that thing to the right, and then that evolved into a router. And then, of course, you could put different tools on it. So, you know, essentially all that wooden tool does there is it adjusts the height of the chisel so you can go down into a hole. Essentially the same as that router, which is the same as that CNC router that I used there. And of course, these are just, for me, I consider them just an extension of your fingertip or your hand. And I like seeing the relationship of what we might define as a hand tool or a power tool. And the fact that we can move those things, and digital tools are often static and we're separate from them. So anyway, I thought I'd show a bit of that. Here's another thing I made in my third year. This was called of drawers, so there's no chest. Okay, so COD, COD, chest of drawers, or of drawers, no chest, if you get what I mean. So it hasn't got the box around it. But those sort of carved walnut, confused object, let's face it, trying to put a lot of things together, but on the side there, those kind of forms, they were milled on in an engineering booth, not so dissimilar from that Bridgeport machine there on the right, and they were the draw runners for the drawer. So very early on, 1996, I was trying to use digital technology along with traditional carving techniques that are on the front of this, etc. Okay, so I graduate and I have at least, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, I kind of call them my wilderness years, where I'm trying to discover myself, trying to work out what's modern and what's contemporary and what isn't, I suppose. And here are some examples of those things. So, like, I guess I was trying to work out how to be contemporary whilst really not being contemporary, whilst making quite ugly, confused objects where I'm really trying to find my language. Every one of these engaged in some sort of weird technology or a lot of expense in mechanical engineering or something. So the middle one there was called something called genetically modified furniture, so GMF, you know, and all the engineering was CNC milled, and it looked beautiful, polished, but like the object looked like a kind of walking alien. Anyway, not very nice things in some ways. I'm proud of them, but like, as you'll see from this presentation, my portfolio moves on quite considerably. So after about sort of my wilderness years, I moved to London, and I start getting back down to basics a little bit, kind of just remembering the simplicity and purity of the form and what you make those forms from. And this block here was made not with that Milwaukee saw. I can't remember what brand I used, but it was a skill saw. And that's all I needed to make that object. It was my first ever workshop. I didn't have lots of kit. I just used what I had. And the point was, I made up that block of timber. It was a solid lump of squares of timber, and I set to with that saw, cutting into it, and then I set to with a chisel and hammer and started smashing the hell out of its outside. And I think this is the moment I realized perhaps it's about application and not necessarily what tools you're using. It's about how you apply a tool to an object and what you're trying to create from that tool is more important in a way than how it's made. It's how it's applied. So, I've jumped a couple. So that led on to this particular piece of furniture here, which is called the Queen Anne table. I was trying to learn to design things on the computer. And when I say try, that's exactly what I was doing. I was trying. I'm not very good on computers, believe it or not. Having made a reputation for being someone who integrates digital technology into his work, I am an idiot when it comes to when it comes to digital. And interestingly enough, this object was celebrated for digital. I'd done a Boolean on Rhino, which is a computer program, and it went wrong. I didn't manage to achieve what I was trying to do with the button on the drawing program on Rhino. And I saw something which looked really beautiful within that drawing, and that led to this piece, this idea of telling two stories about the modern and the traditional. So we've got the very traditional Queen Anne period, which is like a delightful, light, airy period of English furniture, delicate and modern in my mind, along with my frustration of these kind of like boring nature of objects that were coming out in the early 2000s, which were in fact sort of partly to do with where digital technology was, interestingly enough, because you had to get your price point low, and digital technology couldn't really give manufacturers that much more than just your box standard look. So that sort of dictated the aesthetic of the time. Anyway, that was frustrating because I was thinking, why aren't people celebrating craftsmanship? You know, craftsmanship's amazing, you know. And I made the first one of these objects with not that saw, because obviously that's an image, but that's a very small mini max saw and a pair of calipers. And I literally did saw cuts over and over again, measuring the depth of the saw cut every 5 mil, every quarter rotation of a leg. And I did that for 5 days with 9 legs, and I ended up with 4 that I hadn't mucked up on, enough to make the table. And it was celebrated as a digital aesthetic. Ridiculous, really, because in fact it was a celebration of craftsmanship, nothing to do with digital, apart from the fact that in some way the aesthetic had an aesthetic of digital. Yes, designed on the computer, wouldn't have looked like that if I hadn't drawn it on a computer, but not made digitally. Later on, I've done a limited edition of 10, I think, of these. They were later on made on CNC machines, but the very first couple, 2 or 3, were made by hand. If it works, you do it again. So I did a pair of chairs, again, Queen Anne style chairs, cutting in. Anyway, more difficult, kind of ridiculous object, lots of short grain problems for those woodworkers out there going, oh, that's very fragile, or that would never work. You're right, it's really fragile, there's delicate problems, but it did work. They sold. I wouldn't say people are dining on them, but they are sitting in a museum collection, so it kind of worked for me. I made a sale, you know. I've only done 2 of these, and that's the pair. Now, this is the first piece that actually bridges those 2 techniques. So digitally, I couldn't make this, I couldn't think how I tried to think about how to make it in the workshop without having to apply digital technology. But this was the first piece where I actually applied digital technology. Only a flatbed CNC. I put a saw blade on the flatbed CNC. This one, you could articulate the head of the CNC to 90 degrees, and you could put a small saw blade on it, and the saw blade went back and forth and managed to cut the serpentine curve that's in the front of a Georgian chest of drawers. And then I applied the carving technique to the exterior that I'd done on that block that I've just shown you previously. It was a kind of scary moment where I had this thing looking absolutely perfect on my workbench, and then I literally took a deep breath and hit the corner with a hammer. But it was that moment, that conflation between digital technologies and hand processes, where this object comes together, and it's talking about the 2 simultaneously, and communicating something about 2 languages and 2 points in history, which made this object, I suppose, special, and hence its purchase and its presence, and hence that one of them lives in the Victoria and Albert Museum. I mean, I didn't know all that at the time. I was just making objects, and, you know, with the hindsight of reflection, I now know that. But okay, so that kind of brings us to a bit of an end. There's a bit more stuff I'm going to show you before I show you the film, but I had a kind of life-changing moment. Now, there's probably a load of you out there who are thinking, oh, well, that's all very well, you know, digital technologies. Well, I love making things by hand. Well, I love making things by hand too, you know, like, and I love making things without machines too. And in fact, I just love making things without, it doesn't really matter what machine I'm using. I just like making stuff, and it doesn't really bother me what that, you know, what tool or machine that is, as long as I really like the end result. But I particularly love this project. It was called The Last of the Bodgers Apply Their Ancient Craft in Deep Remote Beech Woods. 9 of us went to a woodland, no idea what I was going to make. We had a teacher there who taught us a bit about green woodworking, so working wood in its green state, for those of you who don't know. High Wycombe was the place this was most famous for in the UK, and people would go in their droves to Woodlands and make Windsor chairs and sell them in the town of Windsor, hence the name Windsor chair. And we were to make a Windsor chair, and this stuff was to go off to Milan. It changed my life these 5 days. I loved working in the woods, and it kind of introduced me to a world of wanting to explore traditional craft techniques in a bigger way. And I've got a collaboration that I did with Kevin Gould here, who's an Orkney chair maker. There's going to be a bit more told you about this one in the film, but Kevin's one of the last Orkney chair makers who weaves straw, Orkney being an island or an archipelago of islands off the north coast of Scotland. They don't have any trees, so they use driftwood and straw to make their furniture. And there's often a little drawer in the chair that was to hold whiskey or the Bible. Some say the Bible, some say the whiskey. Some say hot coals, in fact, to keep the seat warm. Anyway, my version had the little drawer. Anyway, Kevin is the kind of custodian of that craft, and has got the weight. Anyway, I'll tell you a bit more of that in the film. The chair's gone on to be interpreted, or I designed it with Anne-Marie, who's used willow work to make a version of it. We've done one with leather, with traditional leathers, which have been, the tannins have come from oak to colour the leather. So the ethos behind the products they're using, reintroducing traditional craft techniques into contemporary objects, and these sell through a company called the New Craftsman that are based in London. So that gives you a bit of a feel for how sort of my love of it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be CNC. It doesn't have to be high-tech processes. And I've stuck this slide in. This was going to be my first slide, actually, because when you type craft into Google, this is what you get. This is the general interpretation of craft. And when I was studying, craft was definitely a bit of a dirty word. And now it's kind of a heroic word, it's used in advertising and publicity. And if you don't have an essence of craftsmanship in your branding or your product, you're in trouble right now, sort of thing, and every car manufacturer, every crisp manufacturer, every beer manufacturer, every whiskey manufacturer is desperately trying to bring out the craft in their product. And I'm not so sure about all this. I get a little bit kind of, we've got to be very careful about romancing about traditional craft techniques. I'm all for them. I love them, but we must be, I've always felt we must be progressive with craft techniques. And I suppose, like here I am indulging them, and then the world's kind of gone mad for craft. So what do? I bolt and go the other way and go back to digital again with the next object I make. And I get an email from Zaha Hadid, and she wants to commission me for some tableware for a project for AHEC. Anyway, there's more about this one in the film. Anyway, I go the other way. The only reason I've got these slides about her in here is just to tell you that it's about me. The minute someone's doing something else, I want to do the opposite. The minute someone's on the bandwagon, I want to do the opposite of the bandwagon. So while everybody was hand cutting their dovetails, I wanted to use a CNC machine, this redundant machine that was using 1% of its brain in a workshop cutting plywood all the time, when it really could do something quite exciting. So we just used almost the same CNC that my uni had 20 years before. We just upgraded its memory so it could cope with the file that obviously computers had moved on, memory of computers had, but the memory within the machine hadn't, in order to download the files into the machine. But we could upgrade the memory of the machine. So anyway, there's me karate chopping Zaha Hadid. and there are the end results from those particular objects. I mean, the reason they were successful, or my feelings behind what they were, is the fact that the objects were trying to be reminiscent of handmade objects. We're trying to capture the magic of hand making, hand skilling, like a thrown pot where you thumb a pot and your thumb is on the outside of the pot and you're drawing the clay up and you're left with the ridges of the hand. And those pots are beautiful and you're attracted to touch them. They have a quality that draws you to them. So I wanted to make impossible looking pots out of wood. So that was kind of the idea there. So this is getting a little bit more business-like now. You know, this is the narrative of what I do. So I work with other craftspeople to sometimes work on my own, creating artwork, which I sell. But this was a collaboration with Amy Betts, where we're just using traditional embroidery techniques, her skills, incorporating them into furniture. We're using robot arms to mill pieces of furniture for the art market that talk about the relationship between hand and machine, which you're going to get an insight on with the film. We've expanded the range with Kevin that are all still made up in Orkney. So there's quite a lot of products and they keep selling. We've sold one now to the V&A as well. So like it's a success, you know, like contemporizing the straw range. We've worked with remnants of the fashion industry and the textiles industry, working with their offcuts and their spares to design ranges of sofas. I still love to pick up an axe and carve a wheel or carve an object. And I've just started using 3D printers to print sand. So it's access all areas from Gareth Neal Limited. In the furniture and the craft world, nothing is sacred. It's all for exploration. It's all for exploring. And this is the point we're going to watch the film. So the film, hopefully, I do a mini introduction before it starts. Don't take it too seriously. Try and keep up with the words as they float across the screen. And hopefully, you know, while you're watching it, if you have any questions, pop them up on the questions bar on Zoom while we go, and then we can have a go at sort of having a bit of a debate afterwards. Okay, Michael.
Great, Gareth. Will you stop sharing your screen and I will share mine?
In the past, things were different. There wasn't the same emphasis on speed of production We used the resources around us to make things that we needed, rather than things we wanted. Hard work. Such hard work. Can't we just design a machine? Surely this could be done quicker. Come on, can you do it quicker, please? No wonder I had to speed this film up. So slow. Do it quicker. Please do it faster. Can't you do it more efficiently? I need it cheaper. Why didn't I just use an electric car to prove this point? I would have got there in a day and got it done in two. I would have been back before the weekend. I've used so much energy cycling there. I've had to eat so much. I'm never going to get carbon neutral status with this amount of consumption. You fool, you thought that by making your vessel with a CNC machine, things would turn out the same. How wrong you were. Is it any wonder these sides don't line up when humans made the machines? Kevin, you are a custodian of traditional Orcadian craft. With it comes great responsibility for its preservation, its reinvention, and its future. Kevin, your hands are a mess. This work is so tough on your hands. Surely you could do with a machine to save the pain of arthritis in later life. I think one of my missions in furniture is to explore how digital technologies are perceived and how they do have craft within them. Objects are alien to us when we see them because we don't understand how that object was made.
I need to be able to reference the hand, the process, in order to have a relationship with that object. There's this Georgian piece of furniture trapped within this raw lumber. The object itself is like a glitch in... The object itself is like a glitch in history, It questions and challenges technique. It questions and challenges technique, the future and the past.
As we evolve, the tools we use evolve. You do nothing that I say.
Master, moving stones around is one thing. This is totally different.
No, different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-hours a gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
Thank you, Gareth. That was
Right. Everyone falling asleep. Finished the popcorn.
thought-provoking, but also very entertaining. We'll take 5 minutes so everybody can grab a cup of tea or a glass of water, and then we'll come back with the audience questions here. That's okay.
Sure. See everyone in a bit.
Yeah, so we'll come back at about 5 o'clock on the dot. Thank you. Hey Gareth, welcome back.
Yeah,
We've all had enough time to process all that information now.
get
Um,
over it. Yeah.
I actually wanted to start by asking you a little bit about, I suppose, your operation in general. So, like, are you working out of a workshop at the back of your house, or do you have a massive warehouse? Are you working by yourself, or do you have 20 people working with you? What way do you?
Um, well, it's a small workshop. It's not on the back of the house, but it's not particularly big. It's kind of, well, it's behind me here. You can just about see in. I'm in the office at the minute. Generally, there's 1 or 2 people here throughout the week. But some things obviously now aren't manufactured by me anymore. So kind of the Orkney chairs are all outsourced and they're made by a company in Hereford. The first ones are things are done by me generally. And the artwork style pieces, it's me moving big bits of lumber around to big machines. So I don't have any of the digital kit in my workshop. I go to the kit and I utilize it elsewhere. But yeah, it's my own space. It's a small workshop, fairly basic. No, nothing. The most digital thing I've got here is the printer behind me. Mostly hand tools.
Cool. And in terms of materials, obviously you trained as a furniture maker, and I imagine most of that training was in woodworking. Do you use other materials within your work? You were mentioning that you were 3D printing in sand. Do you use? I saw that you used a bit of metal at the beginning. Is that so? When you do that sort of thing, is that outsourced, or do you do that within your own workshop as well?
Well, not too bad on a metalwork lathe, but I don't do that anymore. And I mean, I guess at that period with those objects with all the metalwork, I was outsourcing most of that, apart from I think the very first sort of tendril table I made, I went to a blacksmith and I did it with him. But like, we outsourced most metalwork. So, what I'm good at is the woodwork. So yeah, most things like that aren't done in house, but generally, I suppose I mainly stick to organic materials, leather, straw, wood. I guess sand kind of crept in there at the end because I thought it was kind of valid, like in terms of 3D printing, I've sort of avoided polymers till for the moment because of the kind of the environmental credentials that polymers come with. But equally, I'd be happy to mess with ceramics and 3D printing ceramics, but I haven't. But the good thing about the sand 3D printing is that it's a sort of low energy process. So there's no firing or and it's kind of all the sourcing of the materials in Europe. So it's not sort of a heavy consumption in terms of its carbon, unlike perhaps the Zaha vessels, which really are high consumption object. So yeah, I guess, at the moment, try and stick to wood and things that seem to be appropriate in terms of the hand and touch. So more attracted to using materials that have the right feel and ethically sort of fit into my environmental stance.
Cool. That actually leads on to Roland's question. So I'll fire ahead, Eleanor, with this one first. Roland Smith has asked, have you found that using digital techniques in your work, in particular CNC machining process of removing material, makes a difference to how much waste material you have to allow for? Is it a good thing for sustainable future, or is it not so much in terms of using digital tools?
It's kind of 2 questions. I suppose, first of all, where do you get your materials from is the most important point to that question. If they're from a good source and a reputable source, then in theory, most trees, certainly in the UK, you can't really fell a tree without permission. Most UK-based timbers ethically managed. So I say all timber in the UK is ethically managed, in fact. So first of all, that's the main point, is where do you get it from, and is it from a correct source? How did the tree come down? You know, why was it felled in the first place? You've got to ask yourself these questions. So first of all, you've got to do that. And then secondly, yes, I guess milling is wasteful, but all woodwork, you know, when I was first started, you know, I was told right from the start that, you know, 50% of timber, you know, in cabinet making terms, goes up the spout. So, you know, like you're working to a massive amount of waste of timber, and in a way that's sort of why that hack chair, or the objects that I showed you using the robot arm, you know, those blocks of timber are the waste product of the timber industry. So people don't want those lumps because they're full of knots, they're full of scars. They're actually kind of wonderfully the heart of a tree, or the crown of a tree. So, you know, in the olden days, we would have taken a curved limb of a branch to make a boat, or, you know, a component or a rib of a boat or something. And now all the timber industry really wants is the trunk, you know, and the top bit goes and is all goes into the chipper and is wood waste mainly. So, you know, that's what those objects are all about, because those bits of the tree are really valuable and really beautiful, and just as important. So the more that we use of the tree, the less sort of waste there will be. So I guess that's why those objects are like they are. That's why they have a kind of come from a big lump, is because they're the bit that I can, you know, it hasn't been planked because it's full of stuff that essentially blunt machines and is impractical for the kind of industry. So I guess that's what drives those objects. So, you know, and also they're massive carbon sinks, you know, like if I make one big object out of a big lump, then that carbon is stored within that giant chunk of timber. So, you know, until the point of which someone throws it away or it rots, that carbon is held within that object. So, you know, if we can prevent, you know, it going to up the spout or rotting, then, you know, actually we're kind of doing a good thing.
Yeah, and I suppose if we think about more conventional CNCing, often if you're CNCing sheet material, you can be very efficient with it when you use a CNC router, whereas much more difficult to be that efficient when you're cutting it by hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, not only the digital tooling, but also, you know, apps or programs to help you manage your timber onto sheet material will give you space layout, so you can get even more out of your 8x4 or than you thought you could. Yeah. So I think they're there to help. And, you know, if we were running all our workshops off a windmill or a, you know, off a water power, then of course, you know, the energy that we're using to power the machines is coming from a renewable resource. So ultimately, the objects that I have done life cycle analysis on, you know, this idea that you go to the wood and you make it by hand in a wood, you know, that just highlighted the fact that that wasn't necessarily the most environmentally way to go about making something. You know, the cycle ride wasn't the way to get to that, do that 200 miles. You know, the best way to do it would be to do it as quickly as possible, using as little energy as possible. Hence the comment about using an electric car. And it was actually the reason I didn't get carbon negative status and got carbon neutral status on those products was that fact that I just kept having to eat because I was cycling 75 kilos on the back of a trailer. So that kind of ruined that one. So yeah, like, and the Zaha vessels had a life cycle analysis, and the reason their life cycle analysis or their carbon footprint is so heavy was because of the machining time. But again, if we're buying our power from or running our workshops from renewable resources, then in theory, apart from the carbon footprint of the object, I don't need to be there, you know. So it can run without me like those sand vessels. So, you know, I'm the carbon issue in this, you know, feeding me. The machine only needs electricity. And if we can produce that, then, you know, we're doing better things for the environment by almost not making them ourselves. I mean, I like making things. I'm not going to stop, but you know, it's an interesting conundrum, I suppose.
Gareth, I know you're well known as a craftsperson, obviously as a digital designer as well. To be honest, after this presentation, I would have said your strongest suit was probably storytelling. That's an excellent narrative. Yeah, well, it was expertly done. So I'm going to actually ask you a question from Jerry Murray, who has kind of captured what I wanted to say anyway. Is asking, are you caught between two stools or two Orkney chairs? Do you love and loathe technology?
Yeah, I think, yeah, he's got me bang on. I hate it and love it at the same time. A bit like I love hand tools and hate them at the same time. I mean, it's, I guess it's not just the tooling or the machines or, you know, it's kind of my mind that frustrates me, because I can't sit still, sort of thing. I can't sit in one camp. I can't, you know, I'm just the classic guy sitting on the fence. You know, I'm not actually saying one thing or the other thing. I'm just sitting there on the fence, like not putting his hand in either place. And in a way, I feel that's the way you can have a conversation, because if you sit yourself in one camp, then you've got to define your position, and you set your wall up, and you have to defend your territory. I don't have to defend any territory sitting on the wall. You know, I can play in both fields, and both fields are very happy to have me there, you know, and to explore different things. And yeah, it does get to me that I kind of am constantly having this argument in my own head, you know, about whether I should or shouldn't, or whether I do or I don't. And that doesn't just come down to the, you know, the portfolio is so varied, the objects are so varied, it frustrates me that there isn't sort of some visual linear language between them all. And what holds them together is the argument I'm having with myself about tradition and what elements of it we should maintain and hold on to, and what elements are okay and acceptable to progress with. And, you know, I'm sort of coming to the conclusion as I'm getting older, middle-aged, I was going to say middle-aged, I'm way past the middle point, that, you know, it's all okay, you know, like what's not okay is not getting on and making things, you know, or not, you know, I'm definitely all about progression. I suppose that's, you know, definitely underlies everything. I don't want things to stay stagnant, you know.
I think what probably helps you is you allow yourself the time to go back and revise your previous statements and go, yeah, no, that was wrong.
yeah, it's completely all right, isn't it, to just go, you know what, I've said that 10 years ago. I don't mean that anymore. I've moved on, you know, and that's just what life's like. You know, you like certain music when you're 17, and when you're 27, you don't like the same music so much anymore, or you like bits of it and not all of it, sort of thing. So that's just sort of life, isn't it? And if we don't do self-reflection, you know, just as people, you know, as a race, if we don't reflect on our successes and our failures in our own characters or what we make, then we don't improve as a race, or we don't improve as people, or our designs or our objects don't get better, you know. And I think, you know, I'm definitely you know, I'm really keen to ensure that the objects I make sort of move things on, but you know, in a good way, and help inform others that, you know, their work moves on in a good way, and, you know, like, you know, and with an open approach to how we apply ourselves to these things, you know. And you know, there's nothing worse than getting stuck in a rut making the same thing and over again, when actually you've got all these machines and you could do something completely different. And, you know, and that's how the Milan furniture industry was born, because a bunch of designers turned up in a load of wood workshops and, made contemporary objects. And, that's why Milan is one of the biggest producers of furniture, so, you just got to be open, Don't say no too often.
Yeah, and keep making.
Unlike my daughter, who loves saying no all the time. Yeah.
No matter what tools, keep making something.
Yeah, exactly. The biggest failing is not making anything, isn't it? Just thinking you should do something and not doing it. Much better just to do it and then decide whether it was a good or bad idea. But that doesn't apply to everything, does it? That.
No, not everything.
We're just talking about making things. Yeah.
I have a list of questions here from LK Weston. Thank you, Gareth. Absolutely amazing. Could you please explain a bit about your working method? As you said, you're not good in using computers, but still work with digital methods. Are you doing sketches on paper and someone else is inputting information to the computer? So that's the first question. I'll stop there.
Yeah. It generally all starts with sketchbook, I suppose, or research even before the sketchbook. If it is a project that involves digital, the drawings might get to a point where I start doing some basic Rhino modeling, and then I get that model to a certain level, and then I get some expertise of the people who just model a lot or 24/7 use kind of digital techniques, and that can really adds another eye to the object, I suppose, and another level of sophistication in terms of the development of the object. And then I guess the working method would then go back to kind of sampling, mock-ups, models. I mean, you can see some of which just sort of behind me here. There's, small scale version. So I might make a model of something. I might make a sample of a joint to understand the physical strengths or properties of it. I might make a full scale mock-up in a cheap chipboard or, recycle bits of pine or something, and then go back to the computer. So it's kind of, I'm having a conversation between the computer, the sketchbook, the drawing, and the materials. And then I'll have that conversation for a while until I then go, right, I'm going to commit to this object. I'm going to commit precious materials to this thing.
Yeah, I think it's important to, as you said, to go back and forth. But for people who are getting stuck in one certain way, if you're doing lots of drawing and it's not working for you, move to a model, move to a different technology, and then move back again, and that'll help develop your work more and more.
That's exactly it. I mean, I think the minute the sketchbook's not moving on, I need to find another way to express the idea that will help understand it further. And they're the interesting points, really. And actually, technical drawing is another, what I am better at, I suppose, is 2D drawing and really, really understanding the ins and outs of how, those elements are coming together. And then as you do that, you just understand more and more of the object on the way, so then you can go back to your model, even if you're laser cutting bits and glue gunning them together and they're not got that, you just understand it more. And the minute you're stuck, change your tact, approach it with a different material or a different technique. And,
The other question that Elke had was, the method of 3D printing sand sounds very interesting. Can you explain how this is done? How does the sand hold together?
Well, there's some sort of binding agent that's applied. I don't know what that compound is exactly. I've not been told, but I'm sure it's not particularly nice, but it holds the sand together. But with all those images that you saw in the film, all the stills that are rapid, what happens is that there's a massive metal tank about 8 foot by 4 foot in size, and the machine lays a very thin single molecule of sand in a line all the way across the tank, and then it goes back with the polymer that's a type of adhesive that holds the sand together exactly where the sand needs to be held together, and then it goes back with sand, polymer, sand, polymer, sand, polymer, until the whole bed, the whole kind of coffin, as it were, is full of sand. And then and that enables the objects to be built three-dimensionally because they don't collapse in on each other. So the thing is got its bed to keep it together. And then those objects are dug out of the sand. At that point, they're still quite delicate, and then they need to be cured. They need air, and they need another post-processing technique that then holds them as a solid.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if that explains it, but that.
Yeah, it does. And if anybody's interested in looking up more of that, obviously you can look up sand printing, but also the SLS way of printing is the same method, only it's normally done with either plastic dust or metal dust for joining parts together.
Gareth, we have a question here from Tom Dalton. He's a furniture maker who works on chairs that are often inspired by Sugon chairs. Have you ever come across them? They're like straw.
Sudan chairs.
Yeah.
I think I know what they look like. Yeah.
So it would be a lot about like you're weaving straw and so on. But actually, his question has nothing to do with that, but I'm not surprised he's asking one. So thanks for your amazing talk, Gareth. Do you have any advice on the collaboration process? Is there a framework you use to achieve collaborative outcomes?
So that's a nice question. I'm not sure I've got the answer. I don't have a paper template, or a working method. I guess listening is definitely one of the fundamentals. Being respectful is another key point, I suppose. Like, I think, I can only draw on the times that I've done it, I suppose. And with Kevin, Orkney is a small place. It's a sacred chair to those guys up there. It's very special to them. It's required diplomacy and me not to come in thinking I know what, I'm the London designer, here we go, we're going to make something brilliant. It's more about just having that balance and being respectful. And I think, and listening to them about that process. And I think that's it. And it was the same with Amy. Amy came with all these wonderful sort of, her being she's not an embroiderer. She's I can't think of the term, but her stitch work with leather is quite exquisite. And it was just about, how do we best celebrate someone? And I think that's the approach I take. I just want to celebrate the process. And I think, and I don't want to humiliate it or embarrass it. I want it to sit comfortably. And I think, if you're going to have a go at doing a sedan chair, then, be respectful of that chair, and how it's made, and, don't try and reinvent the wheel on it. It perhaps doesn't need it, I guess. But, you can go as far as you want with these things, I think. The sedan chair is perhaps not as connected to one single place. It's a bit more like the Windsor chair, so you could probably get away with pushing it a bit further.
No, that's it from. Do you have another question, Michael?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions here from Nuala. Many thanks for your great presentation. Do you think that there is any piece of work you've made with digital tools that couldn't be made by hand? I think there are a few pieces like that. Vessel piece. If you had enough time, could you make it by hand?
If there's anybody watching that wants to have a go at making one by hand, get in touch. I would love someone to have a go at carving one for me, and I'd love to sit it alongside it. I can provide the files, I can provide the dimensions. I'd love to see I'd love to have a crack at it myself. It would be a very different object and have its own language. The George Chester drawers was only the George Chester drawers because it had hand involvement in it. So the vessel really would have been a hard ask. I mean, those latest sand pieces, I've looked at making them in wood, and I've looked at them using digital woodwork fabrication techniques, and that's ultimately incredibly hard and so time consuming. Worked out how to do it potentially, but I'm not sure it's worth it when there's another process out there that can deliver perhaps a better result.
Diego Zamora has offered his services and asked, would you feed him?
I'd feed you, yeah. Diego, get in touch.
Another question from Nuala is, do you think there is a digital aesthetic? Is it possible given that the action of the digital tool seems to replicate the action of the traditional tools? Is it an injustice to the maker when the aesthetic is defined as digital aesthetic because of the level of complexity?
Well, I'm a bit confused by the question.
So I suppose the first part of the question,
I guess, go on. Sorry, Michael.
the first part of the question is, she's asking, is there such thing as a digital aesthetic?
Okay, so let's do that one first. Yes, because digital tooling is one thing, but it's actually the programs that you design on at the moment, depending on how those, if you're using Studio Max, you're using, I don't know, SolidWorks, depending on what program you're using, they have a visual language to them. And as time goes by, you can identify objects through the tools that you might have pressed on to create that object, such as a Boolean, as I explained with the AND table, or an extrusion, or a twist, so you can kind of, but it starts, it starts losing that aesthetic when you start blending across programs. So if you're using a bit of Maya and a bit of Rhino and bringing one, then you're using the capabilities of one program and the capabilities of another program to make objects that don't necessarily say I'm digital. And I guess it depends how you use those. I use Rhino like a sketchbook. I repeat, I alter. Some people approach digital drawing with the idea that you're going to just make, this is what I'm making. I think it offers so much more than that when you're on the computer, to be a place to evolve the objects. But yes, I think the primary answer is yes. Yeah, you can make things and it really looks digital. And I think that's a mistake. You want to try and make things from digital tools that, don't talk too much about their, don't say I was made on a machine. They need to say something else. It doesn't have to refer to the hand, but it, I think generally most objects, whether they're made by hand or whether they're made by machine, should talk about something else, whether that be function or utility or, environment. It's better that you try and put a story together around an object.
And in many ways, using digital tools makes it easier to do that. I suppose that iterations of sketches you're talking about, because
absolutely.
Drawing, you can add to it, you can change it multiple times, you can save all those drawings, and then you can also make all of those things easier so that you see all of the end results and learn from them.
Yeah, you can make all your comparisons, proportion, etc. You can see them alongside each other over and over and over again, and then you can do sort of stupid things with it, and that might give you that sort of mistake. The kind of the thing at the edge of the idea is often the best thing, isn't it? The kind of the sparks at the edge of things are the kind of where the gems lie of ideas, and you've got to kind of push these things to the point of which they sort of add that little extra.
Yep. I think, Gareth, we'll have to leave it there. I would love to keep going all night. That was a very inspiring talk, and I think it was a great way to finish the series, wrapping up all of the information and the way you use the tools and how intrinsic digital fabrication and digital technology is within your work rather than just an add-on or a replacement of anything that was done there before. It's intrinsic within the work. So thank you. And I suppose I just want to say, because it's our final evening, it's been I found it very inspiring over the last 5 weeks anyway. Thank you to all of our 10 expert speakers, right from Dries from Unfold at the beginning, right up to Gareth here at the end. Everybody has slightly different, or sometimes a very different background, using different tools, different processes, different materials within different craft disciplines, but all using digital design and digital fabrication in some way or another within that craft. And I would like to, well, first of all, thank my co-host, Eleanor. I don't normally thank, so she's delighted there. And DCCI for organizing and helping with all the organizing in the background. And our translators who have been working very hard every evening while we keep them too late and use very technical terms in some ways. And of course, to all the participants, I really hope that you have gotten something from the last 5 weeks, and that you can implement this within your work within the iAtelier program as it progresses, or within your work outside of iAtelier. I hope it has been beneficial and I suppose a good learning process for everybody. So Gareth, thank you very, very much. It was great again to have you this evening, and I think we can sum up by saying Slán lat agus gora míle mai agat, as we say in Irish.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Gareth, thank you very much.
Thanks.